The ICU was quiet, the kind of stillness that hums with waiting. Beeping monitors kept a steady rhythm, machines whirring like tired sentinels standing watch over the unconscious. At the far end of the corridor, in a room bathed in cold fluorescent light, Olivia Nian lay motionless. Once hailed as a tech mogul who built an empire with her bare hands, now she was nothing more than a silent body on a bed, surrounded by wires and medical charts. 6 months had passed since the accident, a high-speed crash on a rainy night. No witnesses, no clear cause, just a totaled car and a woman who never woke up. Dr. Aiden Lee stood by the window, arms crossed, his white coat wrinkled and loose over yesterday's shirt. He hadn't slept in over 20 hours, but exhaustion didn't stop his mind from spinning. He was young for someone in charge of critical care rounds, bright, ambitious, but more than that, he cared in ways the system rarely rewarded. Every evening, he found himself lingering a little longer in room 206. Something about Olivia pulled him in, not just the high-profile nature of her case, not the headlines or the fortune attached to her name, but something else. Maybe it was the quiet strength in her face, the delicate sharpness of her jawline, even in sleep, the way she looked like she was still fighting, even if no one else could see it. That day, when Aiden approached her bedside, something felt different. He stared at the bandages wrapped tightly around her chest, yellowed from age, no longer the pristine white they once were. They looked constricting, wrong. His medical instincts buzzed. She was supposed to be monitored, her care routine. But this was negligence hidden beneath routine. He reached for the medical file at the foot of her bed, flipping through the notes. No mention of a recent dressing change. No record of reassessment. 6 months of the same care, the same mistakes. His jaw tightened. Just then, Margaret, the head nurse, stepped in. Stern, experienced, the kind of woman who kept wards running and doctors in check. She saw his hands hovering over the bandages and immediately snapped. "Dr. Lee, protocol. You can't just touch her without clearance." Aiden didn't flinch. He turned to her slowly, his voice low but clear. "She's been lying here half a year with these wrapped too tight. She can barely breathe. Protocol doesn't matter if it's killing her." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "She's Olivia Nian. One wrong move, and her legal team will bury us both." "Her legal team hasn't visited once," Aiden replied, his frustration cracking through his calm. "Neither has her family. But I'm here. I'm responsible. I'm not letting this go." Before she could say another word, he picked up the sterile scissors and began cutting through the fabric. He worked carefully, his hands practiced but tense. As the bandages came off, faint red indentations lined Olivia's pale skin. Pressure marks, the kind that spoke of slow suffocation. Margaret inhaled sharply behind him, but said nothing. The silence in the room thickened. He cleaned the area and replaced the bandages with fresh ones, snug but no longer restrictive. His fingers brushed her skin just briefly, cool, still but not lifeless. He stepped back, his breath uneven. Then something happened. The heart monitor hiccuped. One slow beep stretched longer than the others. Then another, faster, stronger. Olivia's chest hitched, barely noticeable, but there. Margaret gasped, her clipboard slipping from her grasp. Aiden froze, eyes glued to the monitor. 60 beats per minute, then 65, then 70. He leaned forward, his hand trembling slightly as he whispered, "Olivia." He didn't expect a response. Not yet, but something inside him shifted. She was changing. The machines didn't lie. In that moment, Aiden knew he had just broken more than protocol. He had broken the silence that had held her captive for half a year. And though he didn't know it yet, he had also taken the first step into a storm far greater than he ever imagined. One that would cost him more than just sleep, but might give him something he never thought he'd find: purpose, truth, and a love that would rewrite both of their lives. Aiden couldn't sleep that night. He sat alone in the hospital's dimly lit staff lounge, his back hunched over a tablet, Olivia's file glowing faintly in the dark. The silence outside her room still rang in his ears, but it was the sudden spike on her heart monitor that haunted him. That moment, The moment her body had responded after 6 silent months wasn't random. It couldn't be. He replayed it in his mind again and again. The scissors, the loosening of the bandages, the change in her vitals. Something had shifted, something he'd triggered. But why now? He scrolled through page after page of medical charts. CT scans showed nothing catastrophic. No traumatic brain injury, no internal bleeding, no organ failure. Just a mild concussion and bruising. A neurologist had logged a note 2 months ago. Persistent vegetative state. Cause unclear. Unclear. That word stuck in Aiden's throat like a splinter. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted but alert. Nothing added up. Olivia's condition didn't match her diagnosis. If it wasn't physical trauma keeping her under, then what was? The thought crept in quietly at first, like a whisper in the back of his mind. Then it grew louder, darker, impossible to ignore. What if someone didn't want her to wake up? By the time the idea had fully formed, Aiden was already on his feet, moving down the hallway like a shadow. The hospital at night was a different world, quiet, cold, almost haunted. He turned into the supply room, a place stacked wall to wall with gauze for bags and vials. Nothing out of place. Nothing, until he noticed a box of sterile dressings that had been slightly shifted. Curious, he reached behind them and felt something small and cool. A vial, half full, clear liquid, no label. His pulse quickened. This didn't belong here. Every vial in the hospital was documented, logged, accounted for. Aiden turned it in his hand, holding it up to the flickering light above. No identifying marks, just silence. He slipped it into his coat pocket, heart pounding as if he'd uncovered a secret buried beneath layers of complacency. Back in his office, he picked up his phone and called Jake, a lab technician he trusted, the kind of guy who didn't ask too many questions. "Jake, it's me. I need you to analyze something." "Off the books." Jake groaned on the other end. "It's 2 a.m., man. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." There was a pause. Then Jake's voice, gruff but curious. "Bring it tomorrow." 2 days passed. The waiting clawed at Aiden like a second skin. He couldn't focus. Every time he passed Olivia's room, he lingered, watching her chest rise and fall. Was she still being drugged? Was someone on staff working against her? Then the call came. Jake's voice was taut. "It's a low-dose anesthetic," he said. "Enough to keep someone under for a long time, without fully knocking them out. Almost undetectable in regular screens. You find this in a patient's system. It'd look like natural unconsciousness." Aiden felt the floor tilt under him. He sat down, heart racing. "Why would something like that even be here?" he asked quietly. Jake hesitated. "You tell me." After he hung up, Aiden sat in stunned silence, the vial now resting in his palm. It felt heavier than before. Someone had sabotaged her recovery. Someone had made sure Olivia wouldn't wake up, and the hospital, whether out of negligence or something darker, had let it happen. This wasn't medicine. This was manipulation. And now that he knew, he couldn't look away. He had to dig deeper, even if it meant going against the very institution he worked for. Even if it meant risking everything. He tucked the vial back into his pocket, stood slowly, and glanced toward the ICU where Olivia still lay motionless, her chest rising with the aid of a machine. "I don't know who did this to you," he murmured to the empty hallway, "but I'm going to find out." And with that vow, a war quietly began. One Aiden Lee never asked for, but one he would fight to the very end. Once the vial was tested and confirmed to be a sedative, Aiden knew he couldn't trust anyone. Not the hospital administrators, not the senior doctors, not even the nurses on Olivia's rotation. Whoever had done this had access, power, and enough confidence to believe they'd never be caught. But there was one clue Aiden couldn't ignore: Olivia's family. Or rather, the lack of their presence. In 6 months, not one member of her family had come to visit. Not even her brother, Daniel Nien, who according to the media had become the face of her empire overnight. Aiden started digging. He spent every spare moment researching Daniel. Press releases, business articles, board meeting transcripts, anything he could find. The man was a master of image. Slick suits, charming smiles, glowing interviews about carrying on Olivia's legacy while she lay motionless in a hospital bed. But behind the polished persona, Aiden sensed something else. Ambition, tightly leashed and ruthless. Then he found it. A log of visitor entries at the hospital from the week Olivia was admitted. Daniel had visited 3 times in the first 2 days, late at night, alone, and never stayed long. After that, nothing. It struck Aiden as strange. Why would her only sibling vanish after 3 brief visits? Unless he'd already done what he came to do. He needed more than suspicion. It took some coaxing, and a favor called in to a security guard who owed him. But eventually Aiden got access to old surveillance footage. Grainy, dated but real. He sat alone in a back office, eyes glued to the screen. And then it happened. There was Daniel, standing in a hallway just outside the ICU. He wasn't alone. A nurse approached him. Jenny, quiet and reserved, someone Aiden had barely noticed before. Daniel handed her something small, a vial. His hand landed on her shoulder, like sealing a deal. The camera had no sound, but it didn't need any. The gesture said everything. Aiden paused the footage, heart pounding. He printed the still frame and tucked it into a folder. The next step was riskier. He found Jenny in the break room later that evening, hunched over a cup of tea, eyes tired. He approached slowly, not wanting to spook her. "Jenny," he said softly, "I need to talk to you." She glanced up, startled. "Dr. Lee." He sat across from her, pulling the still frame from the folder and sliding it across the table. "I know what Daniel gave you, and I know what it did to Olivia." Jenny froze. Her hands trembled around the cup. Her eyes welled, and for a moment Aiden thought she might deny it. But then her voice cracked, barely a whisper. He said it was just to help her rest, that she was overwhelmed, that it'd wear off in a few days. Her words tumbled out, like she'd been holding them in for too long. "He gave me $5,000. I didn't ask questions. I didn't know it'd last this long. I swear I didn't." Aiden leaned forward, calm but intense. "Would you be willing to say that again, on record?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If it means protecting her, yes." An hour later, he had it. A recorded confession, surveillance footage, a motive. Aiden spent the rest of the night compiling everything. Images, transcripts, medical notes. By morning, he had a case. He didn't wait. No meetings, no calls. He marched straight to the executive lounge, where Daniel was in a meeting with hospital brass. Through the glass doors, Aiden saw him laughing, coffee in hand, the perfect picture of control. Not for long. He pushed through the doors without knocking. Heads turned. Conversations froze. Daniel looked up, the smile still on his lips, until he saw Aiden. A flicker of unease crossed his face, quickly masked. "Dr. Lee," Daniel said, setting his cup down. "To what do I owe the interruption?" Aiden didn't answer. He walked straight to the polished table, dropped the manila folder, and watched as papers spilled across the surface. Photographs, confession transcripts, a still of Daniel handing the vial to Jenny. "This," Aiden said coldly, "this is what you've been hiding." Daniel's smile thinned. "What is this supposed to be?" "You've been drugging your sister, keeping her under so you could take her place. Run her empire. You used my hospital to do it." Gasps echoed. The board members shifted in their seats, unsure where to look. Daniel chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "That's a bold accusation. Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "I do," Aiden said. "And so do the police. Unless you want this to go public right now, I suggest you walk away. Today." Daniel stood slowly, his smirk now a sneer. He leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "You're a dead man walkingly." But Aiden didn't flinch. "No, I'm a man who's done watching her suffer." They stared at each other, the room thick with tension. Then Daniel brushed past him, knocking Aiden's shoulder on his way out. He didn't say another word. And Aiden? He didn't need to. The evidence was on the table, and the war had begun. The storm outside rolled over Manhattan in waves, thunder echoing through the hospital corridors like a warning. Rain lashed against the ICU windows, and flashes of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room where Olivia Nien lay. Aiden sat beside her. As he had so many nights before, his stethoscope still looped around his neck, though he hadn't used it in hours. The day had been long, 16 hours on his feet, but he hadn't left her side. Not since the confrontation with Daniel. Not since he realized just how close she'd come to being lost forever. He checked her vitals one more time. Everything seemed steady, normal even, but it wasn't numbers that kept him here. It was instinct, a feeling. Something in the air tonight felt different. He adjusted her blanket and gently touched her hand, the gesture more personal than clinical now. Lightning flashed again, casting sharp shadows across her face. And then he saw it, the barest flutter of her eyelids. He froze. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a trick of the light or a wish too desperately clung to. But then it happened again. Her lashes trembled, parted slightly. Her eyes, dark dazed, opened. Aiden's breath caught. "Olivia," he whispered, heart pounding. Her gaze was unfocused, fluttering, but it was there, consciousness, awareness. After 6 months of complete silence, of machines breathing for her, she was looking at him. He grabbed a pen light, carefully flicking it across her pupils. They constricted, sluggish but real, reflexes returning. He pressed her hand gently. "Can you hear me?" he asked softly. She blinked once, then again. He leaned in. "Okay, let's try something simple. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no." A pause, then 1 slow, deliberate blink. Emotion surged in his chest, too vast for words. Relief, disbelief, all tangled together. "You're back," he murmured, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're really back." Over the next few days, her recovery was fragile, like watching a flame fight against wind. But every hour brought a new miracle. The nurses were stunned, the staff cautious. Officially, she was improving. Unofficially, she was rewriting everything they thought they knew about recovery. Aiden didn't leave her side. He brought her water when she struggled to speak, gently swabbing her dry lips. He propped her pillows, adjusted her oxygen, talked to her endlessly. Stories from med school, stories from his childhood in Queens, stories meant to keep her grounded, present. And Olivia listened. At first, it was only with her eyes, following him around the room. Then, her lips began to form silent shapes. The first time she croaked out a word, "Water," his hand shook as he held the straw to her mouth. She said more, slowly, raspily, and when she could speak in full sentences, the first thing she said that wasn't a request, wasn't a question, was whispered with aching vulnerability. "You're the reason I woke up." He turned toward her, stunned. Her eyes didn't waver. "I remember. Your voice," she said, her words ragged. "You never stopped talking to me." He sat beside her, took her hand gently. "I didn't know if you could hear me." "I could," she said. "Not always. But I felt safe." They didn't say much after that. They didn't need to. A new rhythm had taken shape, soft, unspoken, laced with something neither of them dared name yet. But it was there, the way she watched him now. Not with the eyes of a patient studying her doctor, but of someone learning the contours of a person who had become something far more. The way his fingers lingered a moment longer when adjusting her fore, his voice softer when he called her name. It was uncharted territory, a connection formed not for grand gestures, but in the quiet, blink by blink, word by word, heartbeat by heartbeat. And in that sacred space between recovery and rediscovery, love took root. Not loudly, but deeply. By the time Olivia was strong enough to sit upright without assistance, her voice had returned to something firm, still raspy, but no longer fragile. The woman who had once built an empire with relentless drive was beginning to re-emerge, though this time, her power didn't come from boardrooms or headlines. It came from survival, and she was ready to fight. The decision to press charges hadn't come easy. There were moments, quiet ones, late at night, when Olivia would stare at the ceiling and ask herself if it was worth it, if dragging her brother through a public trial would heal anything. But then she'd look at Aiden, his arm around her shoulder, and remember the vial, the lies, the betrayal that almost killed her. No, silence was no longer an option. With Aiden beside her every step of the way, she filed a lawsuit against Daniel for attempted murder and corporate fraud. Their attorney, Rachel Kim, was young but sharp, a firebrand with a talent for turning truth into a weapon. The case moved fast, fueled by public curiosity and the gravity of the charges. After months of whispers, the world was finally watching. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. Olivia, still walking with a cane, entered each day dressed in black, her posture regal, her voice unshaking. Daniel sat across from her, smug in a tailored suit, his smirk barely concealed behind his lawyer's confident posture. But beneath that calm exterior, the cracks had begun to show. The prosecution laid everything out with surgical precision. First, the surveillance footage. Daniel passing the unmarked vial to Nurse Jenny. Then Jenny's tearful, recorded confession. Olivia's medical records, doctored to hide changes in her condition. Financial transfers. Bribes. The web Daniel had spun unraveled before the court's eyes. But it was Olivia's testimony that silenced the room. She stood before the jury, her hands trembling only slightly, and spoke not as a billionaire or a victim, but as a sister. He told the world he was protecting my legacy, she said, her voice clear. But he was stealing it. I wasn't just asleep. I was being silenced by someone I loved. Every word was a blade. Even Daniel stopped smirking. Aiden watched from the bench behind her, pride and fury battling in his chest. He knew what it had cost her to come this far, to stand in front of strangers and bear her wounds. And still she stood. When the verdict finally came, the room held its breath. Guilty on all counts. Daniel's expression crumbled for the first time. His lawyer made a show of objecting, but the judge dismissed it with a gavel strike that echoed like justice. As Daniel was led away in cuffs, his eyes met Olivia's. No apology, only rage. The media exploded. Flashes and microphones swarmed outside the courthouse as Olivia and Aiden exited, arm in arm. She moved slowly, still adjusting to her healing body, but there was a fire in her gaze that no camera could diminish. Then everything changed. The crowd parted, and from its edge, a figure surged forward. Aiden saw him first. A large man in a hood, face partially covered. He was fast. Too fast. Olivia down. Aiden shouted, shoving her behind him as the man lunged. There was a glint of steel, a flash of movement, and then pain. Aiden grunted as the blade sliced across his arm, blood blooming through his sleeve. But he didn't let go. He tackled the attacker, pinning the man's wrist to the pavement as security and police swarmed in. Shouts, sirens, flashbulbs bursting like fireworks. Olivia screamed his name, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands, those same hands that had once clung to life in silence, pressed against his wound, trembling. Aiden, her voice cracked. Oh my God, Aiden, stay with me. Please, I can't lose you. He forced a grin through the pain. It's okay, he rasped. Just a scratch. But her eyes were wide with terror, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but to Olivia, everything else was a blur. She sat beside him in the ambulance, gripping his uninjured hand as though it was the only thing tethering her to earth. Blood stained her scarf, his coat, the metal floor beneath them. But she didn't care. She had almost died in silence. She wouldn't let him go without a fight. As sirens wailed through the city and lights flashed across their faces, Olivia made a silent vow, a promise forged not in vengeance or survival, but in something even stronger. This man had saved her life. Now she would protect his with everything she had. The world had questions. After the trial, after the attack, Olivia and Ian could no longer remain quiet. Not just for herself, but for Aiden, for the truth. So, just a week after the courtroom had echoed with a guilty verdict, she walked into a TV studio, still leaning on a cane, and sat beneath the harsh glow of national cameras. The interview aired that night across the country. Her voice was steady, unflinching. Her words, simple and devastating. My brother tried to kill me. He drugged me, stole my company, sent someone to finish the job. But I'm alive today because of one man, Dr. Aiden Lee. He saved me when no one else would. It was the kind of statement that should have silenced any doubt. And for many, it did. But not for all. Within hours, the headlines began to twist. Sleeping Beauty falls for the help. Millionaire heiress and her ICU boyfriend. Real love or just a hero complex? Charity case or clever opportunist? Photos of Aiden walking beside Olivia, holding her hand, helping her into cars. Moments of intimacy turned into public fodder. The world that had once praised Aiden as a savior now questioned his place beside her. And he felt it. He never said much about the articles, never flinched when reporters shouted crude questions from the sidewalk. But something in him shifted. The way he looked at her changed, not colder, just quieter, guarded. One night, Olivia came home to find him standing at the window of her penthouse, scrolling through his phone, the screen casting pale light over his face. She could tell by the slump of his shoulders, the look in his eyes, that he'd read something he couldn't shake. He didn't speak when she approached, just handed her the phone, the headline already open. She rebuilt her empire. Did she rebuild him too? She sighed, set the phone down on the counter. Don't let them in, Aiden. Not like this. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm trying to imagine what it's like from the outside. You, billionaire, public icon. Me, a guy from Queens with a med school debt and a leaky apartment ceiling. You think that matters to me? I think it matters to the world, he said. And maybe I'm not strong enough to pretend it doesn't matter to me, too. She stared at him, stunned by the distance in his voice. So what, then? You're going to walk away? I don't want to hold you back. Her voice dropped, trembling. You gave me my life back, Aiden. You don't get to walk away. Not now. Not after everything. He looked at her, jaw clenched, heart in his throat. Maybe it's better if you don't have to defend me to the world. But Olivia had been silent for long enough. The next morning, she stood before a wall of reporters in a sleek downtown studio. Every camera in the city aimed at her. She wore a simple black dress, no makeup beyond what was necessary for the lights, no jewelry. Her strength was in her presence. The room quieted the moment she stepped up to the mic. There's been a lot of talk about my life lately, she began. About Aiden Lee. Her voice didn't waver. He's not my charity case. He's not a project. He's not some accessory to my recovery arc. Aiden saved me, not with his degree or his status, but with his heart. When no one else believed I could come back, he did. When I wanted to disappear, he stayed. I'm here because of him, and I love him for it. Gasps, flashbulbs, murmurs rippled through the crowd. But Olivia didn't blink. We're not going anywhere. You can write what you want. Whisper what you want. This man stood beside me in the darkest moments of my life, and I'll do the same for him in the light. She stepped away from the mic, the room stunned into silence. And Aiden was there, waiting in the wings. When she reached him, she didn't say a word. She just looked up at him, a quiet dare in her smile. Believe me now? His response was wordless. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, tender and sure, as the cameras flashed and reporters shouted and the rest of the world melted into noise. The headlines would come and go, but the truth stood right there in front of the world, unshakable, unapologetic, and finally free. The sky was a soft wash of spring gold when Olivia walked down the aisle, barefoot on the grass, her dress light and flowing like a whisper. There were no paparazzi, no headlines, no multi-million-dollar floral arches. Just wildflowers and folding chairs, 20 or so close friends, and a sound of laughter carried on a breeze. Aiden stood beneath a wooden arch, hands clasped nervously in front of him, wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit but felt just right. His glasses kept fogging, and his heart wouldn't settle. When Olivia reached him, her smile was calm but radiant. There was no veil to lift, no pomp, just a look that said, "We made it." The ceremony was short. Their vows weren't perfect, but they were real. Aiden promised to stand by her not just through sickness, but through silence, storms, and success. Olivia vowed not just love, but partnership. Not to build empires, but to build a life. And when they kissed, the applause was small, intimate, and deeply felt. Afterward, they didn't fly off to a private island or toast champagne on a yacht. Olivia had other plans. 2 weeks later, in a sunlit office high above Manhattan, she signed the final documents. Papers that dissolved most of her fortune. Billions redistributed to causes that mattered. Education, women's shelters, healthcare. She kept enough to live comfortably, but no more than that. The board called it reckless. The tabloids called it madness. She called it freedom. Freedom from the pressure, the expectation, the image she'd spent her whole life maintaining. That world had tried to break her. Now she was choosing to walk away from it, not as a victim, but as someone reborn. They moved into a modest brownstone in Queens. Aiden gave up his attending position at St. Augustine's. Olivia traded in boardrooms for spreadsheets and handwritten notes. And together, they opened the Neon Lee Clinic. It wasn't glamorous. A squat brick building with a flickering sign and walls in need of fresh paint. But it was theirs. A place where no one was turned away. No insurance? No problem. No ID? Still welcome. Just care, compassionate, human, and free. Aiden treated patients from sunup to sundown. Kids with colds, grandmothers with aching knees, immigrants who hadn't seen a doctor in years. His white coat was often swapped for hoodies, his stethoscope always warm from use. He knew everyone's name, remembered birthdays, and kept lollipops in his desk drawer for nervous children. Olivia worked the front desk, managed the donations, charmed the donors, and trained the volunteers. She learned medical codes, insurance waivers, and how to fix a printer with a paperclip. She did it all without complaint. Her former board members wouldn't have recognized her, but the community did. They called her Miss Liv. She smiled more now. At night, when the doors were locked and the last patient had gone, they'd sit on the small porch out front, sometimes with takeout containers balanced on their knees, sometimes just coffee cooling between them. The city would hum in the background. Cars, voices, life moving on. Aiden would lean back in his chair, watching the sun dip behind old rooftops. Olivia would rest her head on his shoulder, her hands slipping into his, fingers laced tight. One evening, as autumn painted the sky in burnt oranges and fading light, he asked quietly, "Was it worth it? Give it all up." She turned to him, her smile soft but certain. "We didn't give anything up," she said. "We just finally started living." And he knew she was right, because what they had built, this small, stubborn clinic on a forgotten street, wasn't just a place. It was a promise, a vow renewed with every healed child, every grateful glance, every exhausted but satisfied sigh. They didn't need the city's approval. They didn't need headlines anymore. They had each other. They had purpose. And they had peace. As the stars blinked to life above the rooftops and the porch light flickered on beside them, Aiden pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her beside him. This was their new life. Not perfect, but completely, utterly real. In the end, it wasn't the machines that saved her. It wasn't the million-dollar equipment, or the top-floor hospital room, or the carefully typed medical notes. It wasn't even the hospital itself. It was him, Aiden Lee, the young doctor who stayed long after his shifts ended, who questioned what everyone else had accepted, who saw a woman beneath the wires in the silence. Not a case, not a coma, but a life waiting to come back. It was his voice she heard when the rest of the world went quiet. His hand that brushed hers when no one else noticed. His presence that refused to give up on her, even when her charts said she was gone. And somewhere in that stillness, where breath was borrowed and time felt like glass, something cracked. The darkness loosened its grip. Her heartbeat surged. Her eyes opened, and Olivia Neon came back. But waking up wasn't the end. The world outside that hospital was louder than the machines. It asked questions. It whispered suspicions. It judged their love before it even had the chance to breathe. She had to fight her brother. He had to fight the system. They had to fight their own fears, the scars they didn't show, the doubt that crept in when the lights went off and the crowds disappeared. And still, they chose each other. He faced down boardrooms and legal threats for her. She faced down the cameras and gave away a fortune for him. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. They built something no one could predict. A home not built of glass and steel, but of service, of kindness, of small victories that didn't make headlines. A clinic that welcomed the forgotten. A porch where two hands met each night, worn and tired, but never letting go. Their story wasn't about medicine. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about survival. It was about a love so quiet, it slipped past every diagnosis. A love so stubborn, it challenged power, privilege, and fear. A love so real, it reached into a coma and pulled someone back to life. So when people ask how it all began, the answer isn't a miracle. It's a heartbeat, one that never gave up, one that said, "I'm here, come back to me." And she did. This story reminds us that sometimes love isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. It shows up in small acts of courage, in defying the rules when it means saving a life, in standing by someone when the world turns away. Aiden didn't just heal Olivia's wounds. He helped her find her will to live again. And Olivia, in turn, gave him a purpose far beyond the walls of any hospital. It's a story about second chances, about what it means to truly see someone, not for their wealth or status, but for their heart. And above all, it's a reminder that the most extraordinary miracles often begin with the simplest choices: to care, to stay, to believe. Thank you for listening to this journey, from coma to courtroom, from heartbreak to healing. If this story touched you, inspired you, or simply made you believe a little more in the power of love, please consider supporting us. Don't forget to like, share, and comment with your thoughts below. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring stories that remind us what really matters. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in the extraordinary.